Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. This is going to be the steampunk dress part 2 for the skirt. If you have not already seen the part 1 for the jacket, I will leave that link down below for you. And I will also leave a video for the blouse that I am wearing linked down below as well. I'm really happy with the way that the skirt came out. I'm not a big fan of the waistband, but it was definitely a different way from the ones that I've made before. So for the skirt, I'm using a black cotton fabric, which I pre-washed beforehand to accommodate for shrinking. I'm using a contrasting fabric for the trim, which is the same that matches the jacket from my previous video. And I'm going to be using the Simplicity 2207. I will only be doing the skirt in this pattern. I will be doing a size 18. Start by cutting out all of your pieces, which we don't have too many this time since it's an easy assembly. We're going to start with our 3 skirt pieces, and we're going to do a stay stitch at the top at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Grab your skirt front facing, and we're going to add interfacing to the wrong side and iron this on. Then we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance along that bottom curve. Fold up the bottom edge right where you've made that seam, and then iron this down all the way across. Grab your skirt front with right sides together. You're going to line up the curve from your front facing and go ahead and pin this together, and then we'll sew this on with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Grab some scissors and cut off half of that seam. And then we're going to make some small clips along the curve just before the thread. This will help the fabric lay nicely once we turn it over. Turn out the waistband, and then we're going to tuck the seam allowance toward the middle. And then go ahead and pin that down all the way across. And we're going to top stitch the seam allowance down with a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Then we're going to go back, and you can fold the waistband over at the first seam that we've made. This is a little confusing, so hopefully you can see what I'm doing in the video. And then iron this down in place. Grab your 2 back skirt pieces, and we're going to lay them right sides together, lining up one side. And then pin this together and sew this with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Iron your seam allowance to one side. Grab your skirt back casing, and we're going to fold it in half lengthwise and iron this down. And then sew up that bottom open edge with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Take your back casing and fold it in half to find the middle. Line up the middle with that center seam on our skirt back. Line up the rest of the waistband and pin it down. Sew this on with the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Turn that seam allowance toward your skirt, and we'll iron this in place. Grab a ruler, and we're going to mark 7/8 inches above the seam all the way across your casing. Then you're just going to sew a straight line where you've marked your dots. Taking the elastic guide pattern piece, grab your elastic, and you're going to line it up and cut your elastic to the size indicated. Grab 2 safety pins and put one on each end of your elastic. Then we're going to thread our elastic through the second open section of our casing. Once the end of your elastic reaches the edge, use your safety pin to pin it down so it won't get lost inside. Continue threading through your elastic. And once again, you're going to safety pin the other end down as well. We're going to sew these ends closed. So I'm just going to do a back and forth stitch about 3 or 4 times over the elastic to make sure it's secure and won't come undone. Do this to the other side as well. I couldn't understand why there was so much excess hangover on this back skirt piece, and the next part didn't work correctly with them there. So I just ended up cutting this off by eyeing it and going along with the diagonal, and this worked perfectly and didn't seem to alter the pattern whatsoever. So maybe I messed up somewhere, but I couldn't figure it out. Grab your front skirt piece and with right sides together, line up the sides and pin them together. Sew these with the 5/8 inch seam allowance, going all the way up to that bottom seam under the front waistband. Iron these seams down to one side. Take the top of the front waistband and fold it down, making sure everything's tucked up nice and neat, and pin this in place. And the same on the opposite side. And then pin down the rest of the waistband. Sew the waistband down at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And then you're going to do a stitch in the ditch on the sides. There isn't much fabric hangover, so make sure you go slowly so that you catch the whole thing. So this is what your waistband should look like. Going to the bottom of the skirt, you're going to do a base stitch all along the bottom at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And then you're going to serge or zigzag stitch the bottom edge. Grab your skirt ruffle pieces. We're going to line up 2 right sides together and you're going to pin one edge down. Open this up and then place your third ruffle piece right sides together, and once again you're going to pin up that edge. And then you're going to connect the open edge of your fourth piece with the open edge of your first piece and pin this together. So you should have one giant tube. Sew these together with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Iron open all of the seams. Then we're going to serge or zigzag stitch the top and bottom edge all the way around, but we want to do this in a contrasting thread. And then at the same time, you also want to sew a gathering base stitch 1/8 inches above and below the gathering line. To do the gathers, you're going to start with a 3 or 4 inch tail of thread and start on one side of the line at the 1/8 inch seam allowance. When you get to the end, leave a 3 or 4 inch tail of thread as well. And then you're going to do the same exact thing 1/8 inches on the other side of the line, also leaving your tails of thread. Grab the top 2 threads on one side and pull gently but firmly to gather up the seams. Move the gathers around the whole ruffle piece. And once you have a good amount of gathers, then grab the top skirt piece Line up one seam on the ruffle with the back seam, the next seam on the ruffle with the small dot on one side, and then the same on the other side, and then the last seam on the ruffle matching up with the center front of the skirt. Once you have these 4 sections pinned, you're going to adjust the gathers till they fit perfectly along the edge of the skirt, and then move the gathers around so that they are distributed evenly in each section. And then pin this down to hold everything in place. Sew on the ruffle between the gathered seam, lining it up with the base stitch. Grab your contrasting fabric and we're going to cut 3 1-inch strips. I am basically making my own trim, so if you already have some, you can skip this step. Open up your 3 pieces and lay 2 right sides together, pinning one end. Open it up, taking your 3rd strip and one of the other ends and pinning that together. So you should have one long strip. Sew those ends with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Iron open your seams, and then you're going to fold the sides in toward the middle and iron this down. I have a bias tape kit, so I'm just going to use my bias tape foot to help me fold in these sides. But it's not necessary, you can definitely do this without one. Now that I have my trim, I'm going to line this up right on top of that gathering seam. And I'm going to sew down each side at a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Before you start sewing, make sure you have about an inch hangover of trim. Once you get to the end, you're going to cut off any excess trim. And then with that 1-inch hangover, you're going to fold over the edge so the raw edges are hidden. Make sure everything's tucked up inside nice and neat, and then you can sew this down. That way you have a finished edge. Sew down the other side at a 1/8 inch seam allowance. And it should look something like this. And that's all there is to the skirt. I'm really liking the large ruffle on this, and it really is a great skirt. In the future, if I make it again, I would definitely change up the waistband, but for the most part, it's actually a pretty easy skirt to put together. But now I have a complete steampunk outfit, and all you have to do is dress it up with some accessories, and you're good to go. I hope you liked this 2-part series, and if you did, please subscribe if you have not already, and make sure you click the bell so that you get notified when I upload. Be sure to check out the bottom box for part 1 and the blouse, and I hope to see all you guys in my next video. Bye!